begin the Blackstone-Millville Regional School Committee meeting as well as public budget hearing for March 12, 2014. If you could rise to the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody here. We will begin with, I'll open the public budget hearing, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Perry Davis, who has been our interim superintendent for the past year. And then we will end the public budget hearing and continue with our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As your interim superintendent for this year, one of the primary tasks that the school committee requested of me was to become heavily involved in the budget process. So this evening, I'm going to be giving you some background on how we developed this year's budget. I will tell you that the PowerPoint behind me is rather long, and I'm not going to read all of the material, but I will tell you that it will be posted on our website tomorrow for any of you that are interested in actually seeing the PowerPoint slides with the information. Oh, sorry, it was not on. So I will be taking a minute to kind of go through these slides and give you some information. In your entry to the auditorium this evening, there was a yellow booklet that provides you with some of the basic information on the elements, the major elements of the current draft, and I want to emphasize that word draft, FY15 budget. The school committee is required by statute and regional agreement to hold a public budget hearing, but this is not a meeting to vote on a final budget and to forward that budget to the towns in the form of an assessment. However, it is important at the public budget hearing that we in fact share the information that we have as of this date and show you how in fact that would go through the process of going from our budget to really the number that is most impacting the towns of Blackstone and Millville, what is called the assessment, based on the regional agreement and state law. So in this packet, there is a copy of the enrollment as of October 1. That's important because by regional agreement, that's the number which determines the percent of membership, which then translates into how we divide the budget back to the town of Millville and the town of Blackstone. I just called to your attention those numbers because there's been a slight trend in the enrollment of a decline, both in Blackstone and Millville, but the decline is impacting a shift of about 0.5% in membership from Millville to Blackstone. And I will talk in a minute about, we've taken a 10-year enrollment projection using a consulting firm called the New England School Development Council to kind of look at that trend. Then in the center is what we call a function budget. In the left column are the account numbers, and then the current dollar amounts in the proposed or requested budget compared to the current FY14 budget, and in the last column, what that dollar difference, and I'll be making reference to some of that as we go forward. The last couple of pages refer to what is called the back page. I've never heard it done that way before, but we call that the back page, which really is the assessment process of determining what is the budget, how much do we then look at in the form of Chapter 70 aid, regional transportation aid, and other district funds that can be used to offset the budget, as well as those items that are excluded from the foundation budget, and that works through the actual assessment number. And then on the very last page is the capital expenses. The regional school district currently has some capital debt, and that debt has already been spoken for, but it is in fact something that we do have to assess to the towns, principally for the middle school debt, for the building of the middle school, as well as the sewer bond when the high school was hooked up to the town sewer system, and then currently the roof projects. We are completing projects at the JFK AFM complex, and we will be going from a bond anticipation note to a bond next year, and we are calculating and estimating what those costs would be. The JFK AFM bond is borne by the town of Blackstone because they are the owners of that building. And then we're embarking on the regional roof project, and we anticipate a bond anticipation note for next year, so there are assessment charges against that. We are currently looking at that we did determine this year, because we thought the project was going to start earlier, some capital debt charges in this year's budget, FY15, which we have not yet incurred, and those numbers could go down slightly, and we'd make that adjustment after we get the project started with that. So with that, if you'll bear with me. I was looking for the portable mic, Jesse. Sorry. You have it up there? Thank you very much. So I just want to call your attention to this slide because this gives you an outline of how, as the superintendent of schools, in working with the school committee, working with the building principals, working with the director of student services, we went around and looked at how do we develop this budget. And there are several variables up there that I think people need to understand relative to the vision, mission of the district, our core values, looking at the school committee budget, assumptions and goals, and meeting informally and formally with the members of the finance committee from both communities. I want to introduce this concept of student learning needs. It's very important for people to understand that when you build a school budget, it's all centered around the student learning needs. And then we translate those needs, obviously, into dollars and programs. But it's important that the direction I gave the principals was to really identify and look at what are the student learning needs for students currently in the district, pre-K, in the case of special education, all the way up to age 22. We looked extensively at the budget background data so that we could build a transparency. We could clearly stand up as a school committee and as a superintendent and say that this budget is based on an analysis and a way in which we've looked at the budget with all of the contributing variables that go into the particular line item. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we'll get into the issue of the budget drivers and some savings. There's some good news in the budget. And then the budget increase from 14 to 15, and then the state aid and district revenues. So we have a mission statement, which is on our website. The school committee worked on that prior to mine coming. This drives the district in terms of how we see our mission to serve the students in the communities of Blackstone and Millville. We have a vision, and it's important for a school to have a vision of where does it see itself going, not where it's been, not the current state, but where is it going? The next one is core values. These are the things that the school committee, the community, the faculty and staff, the people involved in the development of the strategic plan, we really have to look at and say these are important to us. And these drive some of our thinking and some of our decision making. The school committee's budget assumptions, I think, are realistic. They're tied to the vision, mission, and core values of the district. They're reflecting the fact that one of the commitments we have to make is to our faculty and staff in terms of our commitment to high quality teaching. We have to look at refining our curriculum instruction and assessment. We are only as good as what we are teaching, how we are teaching it, and how we are assessing our students to make sure that they've learned it or mastered that learning. Developing our budget goals. I think the school committee is realistic. They clearly said to me we want a transparent budget process. I have distributed many, many pieces of information to the various finance committees in the two towns and tried to keep everybody informed as we've gone about building this budget. And when the principals came in to present their building-based budgets to the school committee, as well as the director of student services, we had a long discussion, not so much about line items, but what is the vision and the mission of the individual schools and how do we connect that to developing a budget. So I like to give you my definition of a budget because it's what I believe in, that a budget is nothing more than the financial articulation of student learning needs, and specifically around curriculum, instruction, and assessment. That's what the district is here for. We're looking at student learning needs in terms of mastering skills. skills not just for today, but for the 21st century. And it's important for people to understand that not only are we looking at, English language arts and math and science and social studies, all right, but world languages. We also have to look to the arts. We have to look to physical education and health and technology. We want to be thinking clearly about students in terms of their three major areas, all right, of cognition. How are they thinking? How can we shape their thinking? All right, in terms of their affect, which really is the social emotional learning. Children just don't come to school anymore to learn the 3 R's. They come to school as human beings with lots of pressures and social dynamics that the school is intervening and working on and trying to help those students develop. And the last one is psychomotor skills or physical development. It's not just about physical education, but it is understanding the connection between the mind and the body, your thinking and your body, and being able to understand the dynamics of the learning process. The last one I skipped over was a safe and supportive environment. We live in a world today that unfortunately tends to be a little bit more dangerous, and we have to think more clearly about security measures in our schools. So let me give you the background data. One of the things that the school committee brought to their attention is we have to look at our enrollment. So we belong to this group called the New England School Development Council. We had them come in based on the data of births and the number of buildings and building permits in the towns of Blackstone and Millville to try to determine a projection going up 10 years as to what we see for available students. It should not surprise anybody, but when the economy went down, there was a decline in the birth rate. And that is not just true in the towns of Blackstone and Millville, but it's true in many communities across the Commonwealth. There's been a slight uptick in the birth rate in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we're starting to see some of that. However, it takes 5 years to get a kindergartner. So they're going to be in school, but they're not going to be there next year. The history of the budget expenditures, and also looking at our expenditure data and our budget increases and decreases. So our fiscal challenges, as we face the reality of how do we manage and lead around our budget, we do have some fiscal challenges. We have, new mandates that have been put into place by the Commonwealth. We have responsibility both under federal law and state law for English language learners and homeless children. And those students can come into us at any point in the school year, and we are required to provide some intervention and support. We're also seeing an increasing number of children coming into our school, particularly at around age 3, when the mandate of the law requires us to provide programming. That special ed population, it tends to be more moderate in needs, and our preschool program is an increasing enrollment. Our school choice and our loss of Chapter 78. There are families in Blackstone and Millville that exercise their right under the law to have their children attend other public schools. We currently have 73 children out and 28 in. And when I get to the numbers, that is a net loss to us of over $300,000 of Chapter 78. Then we look at our fixed cost of personnel contracts, benefits and insurance, building costs, student transportation, student safety, and building security. The fiscal opportunities, the district a year ago reached out to our collaborative, and we currently rent space here at the high school to a number of programs that are sponsored by BICO, and it does generate $35,000 in income, which you'll see later as coming in as revenue to the district. The other benefit to that is by having the programs located in our own school, if we in fact place a student in that program, we don't carry the transportation costs because this would normally be the school that they would come to on the regular yellow bus, and therefore they would not be transported out of Blackstone Millville. All right? Balancing the student learning needs with the fiscal realities. The Chapter 78 we're going to talk about, regional transportation aid, the school choice, I mentioned the plus and minusing, the out-of-district special ed placements, and we're also sensitive to the out-of-district vocational education placements. The towns belong to Blackstone Valley Tech, but we also have some students and families that exercise their legal right to make an application to Norfolk County Agricultural School located in Walpole, or in some cases to actually apply to a neighboring VOTEC Tri-County in Franklin. The requirement under the law is if Blackstone Valley does not offer that program, then the student would have the right to apply to another vocational school. And in the case of the Aggie, it is a specialized school. All of their programs center around agriculture, which is not part of the BVT curriculum. Our building-based budgets revealed a couple of areas that we needed to consider new personnel. This is just a presentation. At the high school, we need the equivalent of 2.4 full-time equivalency teaching positions. We need one in the area of world language. That is our department right now that has our highest class size. It also is stressed because we want to offer multiple years of languages. So students start out in maybe French 1 or Spanish 1, another group moves on to Spanish 2, and groups move to Spanish 3. The numbers tend to get a little smaller in the 3 and 4 levels, but we made that commitment that we would offer that curriculum. So that is an area that we have 3 world language teachers currently, and we are really stressed in that program offering. The other is an information and library specialist. A few years ago, the position of librarian was eliminated from the budget. We no longer need a books librarian, somebody to put books away and do the catalog. We need an information specialist, somebody that works with our faculty, staff, and students to help them navigate the information world that's centered principally on the internet to get access to information. The other area that we're looking for a .4 position is in physical education. Currently, we have an athletic director who's new this year, who teaches 4 classes and gets a stipend to be athletic director, and he teaches 1 less class. The reality is athletics today requires more hands-on management. We're responsible for implementing laws around harassment, bullying, and concussions. With half of our athletic coaches not coming from faculty, there's a great need for supervision of our athletic coaches and providing some professional development so that they in fact understand the dynamics of working with adolescents and understand the rules and regulations that we have to work under that are mandated by state law and federal law in the area of athletics. Most of our fellow schools in our athletic league do not have full-time athletic directors. This is not a full-time athletic position, but most of the athletic directors that if they're teaching, they only teach 2 classes. Textbooks and supplies. The high school is going through its accreditation process next year, and there are some direct expenses associated with going through that process. We only do that once every 10 years, but you do need to fund them the years that you're going through. At the middle school level, we continue our commitment to the concept of middle school, which requires teacher teams at grades 6, 7, and 8, and teaching supplies and materials. And I just went the wrong way. There we go. At the JFK AFM, the Blackstone Elementary, we have undertaken a literacy professional development. It's a 3-year program, and we need to continue that next year and the second year and then the following year. We are attempting to maintain our class size ratios, and we're doing likewise at the Millville Elementary as well. And it is a challenge when you look at declining enrollment and the number of children that will be coming to our schools. So we're having to look at that very closely. In student services, at the high school, we need to add a .6 special education teacher for the high school, and continuing a program that was started at the preschool level for children with more moderate disabilities. We need to now move that program up to the 1st grade level, which requires an additional teacher. Out-of-district placements, we have applied the special education circuit breaker aid, which is a funding mechanism that is built into the state budget. That is now built into our budget. It is not, you will not see that on a revenue side because it really is intended to be a reimbursement, and therefore we're lowering the special education budget because we anticipate over $300,000 of circuit breaker aid. Our transportation for out-of-district special education students is up. As we have a few more students going out, those expenses continue to impact the special education budget. Contracted services for specialized services to some children that require more intervention. It is more cost-effective to contract those out than it is to hire full-time staff to work with them in our district. And then our support staff, again, we have a federal grant for special education under the federal IDEA, the federal special education law, and a number of our support staff, special education aides are funded through that grant. Our professional development I talked about, and our tuition reimbursement for teachers and our instructional strategies to improve student learning is all part of our professional development program. We've been impacted this year because the position of assistant superintendent, principally for curriculum instruction, was not filled, and I've been doing that job in addition to being the interim superintendent. I just recently hired somebody to come in after the first of the year to work 2 days a week with me on that process. Our technology, we are continuing to support all of our technology, which is our infrastructure, and it's an integral part of learning today. We cannot possibly engage students in learning without integrating technology into their classrooms. It's interesting to go into a first grade class and watch kids manipulate an iPad. It's scary, but they know how to do it. We are replacing our technology as we need to replace, but we are not putting in this budget any new technology initiatives. The reason for that is the interim superintendent, I do not currently have an integrated technology plan. We need to have a technology plan in order to talk about what kind of additional technology we bring into the district. So at this point, there is not that because we do not have a plan. So our budget drivers are contracted services, contracted salaries based on our collective bargaining agreements, student services, new teaching positions, the textbooks and supplies, the information technology, athletics. I just want to say one thing about athletics. When I found the budget, when I came here, there were, the budget was not adequately funded. And, you know, it became very apparent in looking at that budget that we had not adequately provided for our athletic program in terms of the necessary supplies and materials, the cost for transportation, the cost for officials. So, you know, it's an area that I looked at. As well as the next item, building maintenance. The building maintenance accounts had been trimmed severely over the years, but the reality is the buildings are getting older and we need to have money in there for repairs and in order to do building maintenance. This year alone, almost every one of the buildings has had some kind of impact on its boiler or heating system. It's been a cold winter. When you have cold winters, that stresses that system and things start to let go and they require maintenance. It costs sometimes $4,000 to replace a circulator pump, as we had to do at the high school. We had to spend about $3,000 at another school because of some of the connections to the boilers in order to have them operate efficiently. Those things just happen, and there needs to be money in the budget to provide for that. Our budget savings. I looked at how do we determine how much money do we spend on heat, how much money do we spend on electricity. The best advice I've been given over the years that I've been a superintendent is you look at 3-year averages. You take your expenses for the last 3 years and you average them, because that will give you your kilowatt hours in terms of usage. It'll also give you your gallons or your gas metered cubic feet of gas. Then you can kind of take a determination of how to bring that number forward. We do bid through our collaborative for our 2 schools that are on heating oil, and then the 2 schools that are on natural gas come through the Blackstone Gas Company. Our networking and telecommunications, all right, and then as I said, we did not have any new major initiatives in the area of purchases for technology. So this is a comparative number. Compared to fiscal 14 budget, the one that we're currently in, the total budget is up $459,588, or approximately 2.6% of the total budget for regular education. When I look at the special student services budget, that is up to $4,253,145, or up $266,141, or 6.7. Somebody's good at math. You average those two together, and the budget's up $725,729, or 3.4% increase year over year in terms of actual dollars. So in terms of the budget, the school committee, along with the principals and the director of student services, have done a very good job of looking at the budget, applying what I would call sound management practices to determine, some of the areas that we could look at and make judgments about line items in terms of where we are. Let me share with you some good news. The district made some decisions a couple years ago to work with its collective bargaining groups to modify our health insurance plan. Today I signed a contract, and I've already taken the savings in the budget. Next year our premiums do not go up. They remain the same. That is the direct result of two factors. One, we are experience rated, so over the last 2 years our usage of health insurance dollars, our loss ratio is below, and therefore we benefit by getting to stay at the same rates. Health insurance has generally been going up, somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 10%. So the good news is that the steps that the school committee took a few years ago are coming to fruition. Having said that, I just want everybody to understand, when you are talking about health insurance, claims generate against your rate, and in the future, if you have larger claims, your health insurance rate could go up. But at this point, the steps that the school committee took to control some of those expenses in cooperation with our various collective bargaining groups has actually generated some savings for us. And at mid-year, our MedX plan, which is for our retirees, also did not experience an increase, which resulted in the savings. This is our state aid picture, and I just want to review that with you quickly in terms of where do we get these numbers. House 1 refers, actually it's called House 2 this year, I stand corrected, is the governor's budget that he submits to the legislature, and the Department of Education and the Department of Revenue then generate what are affectionately referred to as cherry sheets of what is the actual numbers that you can anticipate. And as a regional school district, we get an anticipated Chapter 70 number. We believe that that's a firm number. I will be honest with you, I highly doubt if the legislature is going to raise that number. So we believe that's the base number. The good news is that regional transportation, last year at this time, the governor actually cut regional transportation, and the House and Senate restored it. So the regional transportation number is up to $433,000, but that's still funding our transportation number at less than 50% of our actual cost. So you total those two numbers at $11 million, and then we have the school choice offset. That is, we are receiving money on Chapter 70 because we have students coming in, but then we have students going out, and we lose $305,755 for offset for school choice. We also lose an offset. We have a student in a charter school, and we lose $9,343 for that. So our subtotal there is that we lose off of our Chapter 70 money. The subtotal there is $315,098. So our net number at the bottom between Chapter 70 and regional transportation now comes in at $10,802,974. I need to call on Mr. Buckley to help me with this one. District revenues. It's important because this is a number. You see a big zero about fifth line down. And the numbers up there is that the district has the ability to apply for a federal program called Medicaid for a reimbursement of some of our special education charges. And we anticipate, and this number may change, $60,000 coming in that we can offset the budget. The rental, as I said, to BICO is $35,000. Interest income, which is our investments, but the banks are not paying a whole lot for our balances. And then the other is the fees that are collected for music and athletics, $65,000. But now we have the excess and deficiency account referred to as E&D. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Davis. Turn it on, Mike. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Davis. If you look at the draft back page in the first yellow sheet, you'll notice if we take a look at fiscal 14, which we're in now, approximately last year about this time we had about a $1.1 million, $1.177 million deficit. And we were able to apply about $655,000 from E&D last year, and that pretty much wiped E&D out. When E&D was recertified this year, it was recertified at about $520,000, give or take, which is about 2.5% of our operating budget. And we really need to, our accountant and our auditors say that we need to keep that number whole with about $500,000 in the E&D going forward. And the big reason for that is it helps with our bonding rate, or what we pay to borrow money. And as you know, we're about to borrow money for the roof, as well as roll the Blackstone bond into a permanent financing now that the roof has been completed. As well as this is our rainy day fund. This is what saves us from the abyss, if you will, if something happens, if we have a catastrophic issue, if we have a cost overrun in a program that wasn't forecast. And all those things could potentially, you know, be a burden to the two towns. So this is our stopgap method that we need to hold on to. Probably those of you that go to town meetings, you probably hear in the annual or the special town meeting in the fall where the towns spend down some of their free cash or put money in their stabilization account and so forth. Well, this is basically what ours is. So we really can't by law go back to towns and say, oh, we missed the budget by $500,000. You know, we can't issue them a supplemental assessment. So that's the key thing that's, we're in a situation here this year that we don't have that to apply. Furthermore, and Dr. Davis is going to talk to this in a little while, you know, the fiscal 14 budget is exceptionally tight. Now, after the hearing last year and after the elections, the committee spent many hours going back through the budget last year in order to save programs and keep teachers in front of students. And we did a pretty good exercise of going through the entire operational budget. If you recall, we had talked about around a year ago that, you know, we were looking at reorganizing the elementary. Perhaps we could live without a school, et cetera, et cetera. So in response to that, you know, the committee was left with a very tight operation in fiscal 14, and that hasn't changed. So while we are able to put about $164,000 out of our money, or your money, but we hold it, to apply to the deficit, we still have a significant amount that we have to make up.
So if you will, we're going to talk a little bit more about where do we stand. And as Mr. Buckley said, our certified excess and deficiency is at 529,044, but that is the only available resource if there are expenditures during the fiscal year to which the district has no ability to just go back to the individual towns to deal with the crisis. Specifically, there are a number of what I would refer to in the budget, all right, as kind of unfunded liabilities, because we couldn't possibly anticipate a big boiler just blowing up. We have health, we have insurance, so insurance would cover some of that cost, but we also, you know, have deductibles on our insurance. We also have liabilities with employees relative to accumulated sick leave, all right, that have impacts on personnel costs. There are a number of these items in the budget you couldn't possibly put away enough money, and we don't have the ability to create stabilization accounts to kind of pay for them. So the reality is that 529,044 becomes important as a way of, if you budget tight, you at least know if something were to come up that there would be an ability. Now the regional district just can't spend out of its E&D account. They have to under the revised state law, sit down with the towns and explain the expenditure and be able to go through a process as it's prescribed in law to do that. And as Mr. Buckley said, it's also important to understand as we go out to the bond market, the bond rating for the district, the bond rating for the town of Blackstone, the bond rating for the town of Millville all come into play. in the bond market as you go to borrow money for the roof projects. So our operating budget increase, our state aid has increased by approximately $130,103, most of that coming from the minimum increase in Chapter 78 of $25 per child, but most of it is directly related to the increase in regional transportation. The district revenue, as Mr. Buckley indicated, we no longer have $655,693 to apply to the assessment, to lower the budget for the purposes of applying it to assessment for the towns of Blackstone and Millville. I liken it to, we had money in the savings account, we chose to spend it, we don't have that money in the savings account any longer. Right? So our deficit is a revenue deficit of about $525,590 going forward. We do have the capital costs, but those are all spoken for, quite frankly, in the funding mechanism. So our assessment deficit, if I apply the current proposed budget, the state aid, the community contributions, which are the items not covered under foundation budget, less the district funds, that leaves us an assessment deficit of $1,466,668 without the ability to dip into the E&D fund in any way to reduce that amount. The current budget, Mr. Buckley talked about it, all right? In terms of our assessment deficit, we don't have money in the E&D account to draw on. Later, after we conclude the budget hearing, the school committee will stay in session, and I will give them an update on where we are with the fiscal 14 budget. In October, I gave them a projection. I thought our budget was going to be about $300,000 in deficit. And we've taken steps to try to manage that deficit. And hopefully this evening, I'll be able to show the committee that we may be able to manage and close the year, without going into deficit. However, one of the largest contributors to the E&D fund is unexpended funds in the current fiscal year. And I do not anticipate money going into the E&D account because most of our accounts that we normally would kind of hope would generate some additional revenue, we've had to use to offset this $300,000 deficit that we had when I came in August and identified in September and presented to the school committee of $300,000 out of balance in terms of the budget. The loss of Chapter 78 for school choice is significant. It's a $305,000 debit against our Chapter 78. And also, we are experiencing the increased cost in student services, but I point out these are mandated services. We can cut a lot of things in the budget that aren't mandated, but in the area of special education or English language learners or homeless, we have laws that say you must provide that. And therefore, it's a conundrum or a very difficult situation when you're talking about the budget. The impact on students. If we have to address this deficit of revenue deficit of $1.4 million, it clearly will result in the loss of teaching and support staff positions. Having built this budget, sure, I could probably scrub out a few more $1,000s, but I cannot find $1 million. We've scrubbed that budget. We've looked at all of the major accounts. I shared with you the health insurance story earlier. We've saved in that account alone over $100,000 in terms of our rates being frozen. Reductions in instructional supplies. We can only cut so much out of instructional supplies because we're a school. Students need supplies in order to be educated. We need to buy textbooks. We need to buy instructional materials. That has to be part of our budget. Professional development. We would have to make possibly reductions in professional development to our staff. So our budget dilemma is our operating budget, our revenue deficit, and its impact on the regional assessment. And I clearly understand the dilemma that will face the towns of Blackstone and Millville. This is not a small number. This is not a small number for us to consider as a regional district or to present and share with the towns of Blackstone and Millville. And approximately a 70-30 split. Approximately a 70-30 split between Blackstone and Millville. It's all about the assessment number. How do we get there? How do we manage that and have that discussion as we go forward? how to fund the modest, what I would refer to as a modest increase in the operating budget of just a little over 3% in terms of year-over-year budget. How do we deal with the major deficit in district revenue to balance the FY15 budget? All right, we cannot do it simply by grabbing money out of E&D. That's just not possible. And we just, have to either reduce the budget or we have to increase our revenue in order to make that happen. It can't be done any other way. What staff and programs will be reduced as we address the revenue deficit and its impact on regional assessment in each town? That is going to be the discussion tonight, and it will be the discussion next week with the school committee in terms of how do you come up with that. As I've shared with the principals, this is not money we find. This is not money we find by cutting a few $100s out of instructional materials or cutting back on a field trip. Not that we wouldn't look at those areas, but the reality is we're dealing with over $1 million deficit. That has to come out of personnel because the major contributor to the budget is personnel and benefits. What funding options need to be discussed with Blackstone and Millville? We need to have an honest, open, transparent discussion with Blackstone and Millville about the learning needs in the budget for the regional schools and the impact it would have on the programs that we offer at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Recognizing that there are stresses in the town from budgets for Blackstone Valley Tech, the Norfolk Aggie, and some tuitions to Tri-County. It's all education dollars, and there's only so much money to go around. And how to develop a long-term plan to address the district revenue deficit. How do we, in fact, negotiate and talk about how do we address this issue of using available revenue that the district can sometimes develop, and what's a reasonable way in putting that into a financial plan as we kind of go forward and build up. I've been the superintendent, and this is my 5th school district, 2 as a retired superintendent, my 4th regional district, and I have to be honest with you, in all of the districts and regions, I inherited deficits. So I don't know if that black cloud comes along with me, but I have inherited that multiple times. And I've had to develop strategies and work with communities to talk about how we get the budget back into balance. It can be done. It takes a level of cooperation, collaboration, and transparency to move and get people to understand this is a structural issue as we experience declining state aid, and it's also a reality of the regional district not having the ability to generate millions of dollars in its own revenue. So the budget decisions, how do we balance the operating budget and the assessments? Right? We've got to discuss them. And I leave you with that. That is the way the budget was developed, and that's the impact on student learning. And we are sharing with the community in this budget presentation that we do have a deficit problem, that we need to engage Blackstone and Millville and the greater communities in understanding that. But we've not made, we have not made, the committee has not made any decisions on what would be reduced. But at the same time, there is this stark reality of a $1.4 million deficit that has to be discussed and dealt with. Mr. Chairman?
Any questions from the public? We'd love you to come down and ask if you like. Seeing none, we'll move forward with the meetings.
Again, I just want to reiterate that the PowerPoint will be up on the website, and any budget information is always available in my office here at the high school for anyone from the community to come in and ask and pick up information on that. But to all of you, thank you for coming this evening for the budget hearing, and I'll turn it back.
I just wanted to touch base that, we've kicked the can down the budget, down the road of many years now in the lexicon of today's acceptable speak out of Washington. We are looking forward to, some of us have been part of a budget subcommittee over the past several months, starting to put the frameworks together to talk to the communities. And, we hope that we can count on your support and continued interest in what we try to do here. I'm kind of disappointed at the turnout. This is one opportunity for voters, elected officials, to come forward and ask questions and try to understand this $22 million operation. But for those of you that did come out tonight, it's really appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Chaplin, would you like to use the microphone? Or you want your assistant principal voice?
My assistant principal voice can probably work. But we're still live, so they're going to be able to hear me or no? All right.
Okay, we'll proceed with our meeting. Consent agenda A, warrants, use of school facilities, none. Field trip requests, minutes of the meeting, February 27, 2014.
Motion to accept.
Motion made by Diane,
Second.
second by Wendy. Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Report of the superintendent.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in your packet this evening was a projection of our current fiscal 14 budget. And at this point, we are looking at two numbers. We're looking at closing the regular ed budget in the plus of $267,522. The special education or special student services budget is in negative $388,025, leaving us a projected deficit of $120,503. We are getting more regional transportation aid than we originally anticipated because of the legislature, when they passed the budget in July, restored some of the money for regional transportation aid. So we will be getting more revenue in than we originally anticipated. Working with our auditor, who's in auditing our books now, we would develop a strategy to address the closing of the budget so that the fiscal 14 budget would close in the black as of June 30. But in so doing, it will absorb any money that we normally would flow back into E&D. By state law, we can't have a negative close. It's not allowed. So we have to have a strategy. I have frozen a number of line items in the budget this year, and we have been very judicious in spending money. Mother Nature has cost us dearly in our heating accounts, and it's cost us in my custodial overtime accounts for snow removal. And I understand we have set a record in how much salt and sand we picked up at the DPW garage in Blackstone, and the bill is in the mail. So we know those costs are not going to be lower. They probably will go in deficit, and that's been projected. The saving grace has been, quite frankly, health insurance, because we had a savings in our MedEx plan at mid-year. Since that plan runs January to December, we did pick up savings in that account, and we had some other accounts, some money that we did not spend in technology, and savings in the central office with the interim superintendent and assistant superintendent positions not being filled full-time. So we anticipate the close, but at the same time, I do not have any news that we would be closing any large amounts of money to the E&D account. So we will keep you informed on a monthly basis, but this is part of the dilemma, the revenue deficit in the E&D. Okay. Any questions from members of the committee? There's a detailed printout attached to my memo citing the line items where there's savings, citing the line items where there's deficit. Bracketed money is deficit. Numbers that aren't bracketed are positive. So we did not put the color red in there. It's just in brackets. Any questions from members of the committee? I can't see all of you, so I kind of got leaning down the pike. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Perry. Next item on the agenda is school committee candidate review. So this is on here because last week when we met, the committee decided to do 3 site visits of our remaining candidates. One of those candidates has since then accepted a job other than Blackstone Millville Regional. And I'm going to open it up for discussion in terms of, we have 2 remaining candidates. that we have site visits scheduled for tomorrow and Friday, but it is up to this committee if you want to add a third or continue to have a third. So I'm going to open it up for discussion to the committee to talk about that. So should I say that silence is we are going to stick with the remaining two, or are we going to add a third? I don't hear anybody.
Okay, I'll speak.
Please.
I would be confident and stick with the two that we move forward, with the understanding that we could always go back to the others. There was two tied for fourth, I believe, so that's always an option for us. So that would be my consideration.
Do we know if any of the other candidates are finalists in any other districts?
I agree. I think we just have to wait and see. We have one visit tomorrow, one visit Friday. So by, really the weekend, we're going to have some feedback and know at least maybe some direction we're going to go. So hold it off another few days, I don't think will hurt us.
Yeah, I would agree with what Brian said. We have visits Thursday and Friday. So at this point, we're not going to do anything until the weekend. At that point, if we have to call another candidate forward, we can do that at that time.
Okay, so do we need a motion or a vote on that, the committee? No, we don't. Okay, so we will move forward with that, with our two scheduled site visits for tomorrow and Friday.
Can I ask, has anyone joined myself, Maren, in the chair? Anyone besides us three? Okay.
Okay, moving forward, there is no executive session. Upcoming meetings are next Wednesday, March 19th, 2014, for our budget adoption. And is that here? Is that?
It was in your calendar, that's why I put it down. As the high school, I would prefer that we go back to the middle school.
I think we would all prefer. So I think it'll be at the middle school.
Sentimental, I kind of like it.
Yeah.
A little more work to set it all up.
We'll post that meeting for the middle school.
Yeah.
Would you like to start at 6:30 that night? We can start at 6:30.
What's the pleasure of the committee? 6:30 or 7?
I'll do 6:30.
6:30?
6:30.
And since you'll complete the visit, I'm assuming the committee would like some time to talk about the superintendent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
That's open session, yeah. And just to clarify for the public, the site visits will take place in Sutton tomorrow and in Wellesley on Friday. And it's basically going to gather more information. There won't be any deliberation. All the deliberation is done in the public. We'll bring that information back here next week, and we will provide the committee with the findings and discuss how we move forward. Any other public forum? No, seeing none. We can do good and welfare for the school committee. Any other agenda, any other items going to grab? Okay, I'll be looking for a motion for adjournment. Made, seconded, all in favor? Aye, we're adjourned.